I apologize for the misunderstanding. You're right, I should have started the adaptation immediately. Let me begin the translation and adaptation as requested. The Ritz-Carlton gleamed under the fading light of the Los Angeles evening. From the easy 12th floor, Gabriel Montgomery observed the beach activity through the window of his executive suite, adjusting his Italian tie in front of the mirror. At 55, his imposing figure still commanded attention. Meticulously trimmed grey hair, an athletic build maintained by regular tennis sessions, and a pair of penetrating green eyes that seemed to evaluate everything and everyone. The car is waiting. "Mr. Montgomery," announced Teresa, his personal assistant for over 2 decades, interrupting his thoughts. "Thank you, Teresa. Has Helen arrived at the restaurant?" "Yes, sir. Mrs. Montgomery is greeting the first guests along with Mr. Richard Miller." Gabriel nodded, satisfied. Helen, his wife of 25 years, had always been impeccable in her social duties, and Richard, his closest partner, had a natural talent for networking. Tonight's dinner at Chez Laurent, the newest restaurant in his chain of luxury establishments, promised to be memorable. As he descended in the private elevator, Gabriel couldn't contain a smile of satisfaction. He had built his empire from scratch, transforming the small hotel he inherited from his father into an international chain of high-end resorts and restaurants. The Montgomery Group was now synonymous with excellence in the hospitality sector, with establishments on 3 continents. The journey to the restaurant was brief. Located in Beverly Hills, Chez Laurent occupied a fully restored historic mansion with a privileged view of the city. As he entered the main hall, Gabriel was immediately enveloped by the sophisticated atmosphere he had helped create. Helen, stunning in a red Valentino dress, was animatedly conversing with a group of businessmen. Upon seeing him, she flashed her characteristic magnetic smile and walked towards him. "Darling, I'm so glad you're here. The Japanese ambassador just confirmed his involvement in the Kyoto project," she whispered, kissing him on the cheek. Gabriel caught the familiar scent of jasmine she always wore. Helen was more than a wife. She was his strategic partner, fundamental in every step of his rise. Or at least, that's what he had always believed. The evening was progressing perfectly. Between glasses of champagne and conversations about new investments, Gabriel felt in absolute control of his world. Richard Miller, his partner for 15 years, was enthusiastically presenting expansion projects for Southeast Asia. It was during the presentation of the main course, an elaborate sea base with saffron sauce, that everything changed. A young waitress whom he didn't remember seeing before approached to serve more wine. Her movements were graceful, almost rehearsed. When she leaned in to fill his glass, she whispered something that made his blood run cold. "Don't get in the car. Your wife wants to kill you." Time seemed to freeze. Gabriel maintained his composure externally, but his brain short-circuited. He watched the waitress walk away discreetly, as if nothing had happened. There was something familiar about her features, something he couldn't quite place. He tried to return his attention to the ongoing conversation, but the young woman's words echoed in his mind. He looked at Helen, who was laughing at something Richard had said. Her smile, once so comforting, now seemed to contain something sinister. In the following minutes, Gabriel analyzed every detail around him with new eyes. He noticed the exchanged glances between Helen and Richard, saw how their hands touched discreetly as they passed each other, identified patterns of behavior that had previously gone unnoticed. When dinner came to an end, he made a decision that would change the course of his life. Instead of getting into his armored Mercedes, as he did every night, he asked his security guard, Jack, to make the usual journey to his residence. He himself would take a taxi a few minutes later. From a nearby corner, he watched his car depart. Seconds later, a black SUV appeared at high speed, violently hitting the side of the Mercedes. The impact was brutal. At that moment, Gabriel Montgomery understood that his life, built on seemingly solid foundations, was about to crumble. The mysterious waitress had just saved his life, but she had also inaugurated an era of uncertainties and discoveries that would forever transform his existence. The taxi dropped Gabriel off at a discreet hotel in downtown Los Angeles. His hands were still shaking as he typed a message to Teresa, his trusted assistant, asking her to provide clothes and personal hygiene items. He couldn't go home, not yet. He needed to think, to analyze every detail of that surreal night. Jack, his security guard, had survived the impact and was in the hospital with minor injuries. The SUV driver had disappeared from the scene before the police arrived. Too much of a coincidence to be just an accident. In his hotel room, Gabriel watched the first news about the incident on TV. The anchor was reporting a traffic accident involving the vehicle of businessman Gabriel Montgomery, while Helen, in a live interview, demonstrated exemplary concern. "Thank God my husband wasn't in the car. He had a last-minute commitment and cancelled his return home. We're all very shaken by what happened." Gabriel turned off the TV, nauseated by the performance. The mask of devoted wife that Helen wore now seemed too transparent. How had he not noticed the signs before? The frequent meetings with Richard, the sudden trips, the whispered phone calls. Teresa arrived at the hotel an hour later, bringing a suitcase with necessities. Her red eyes betrayed that she had been crying. "Mr. Montgomery, thank God you're all right, but what's going on?" Gabriel hesitated. Teresa was like family, but the fewer people who knew about his suspicions, the better. "Teresa, I need you to do something discreetly. Find out everything you can about a waitress who recently started working at Chez Laurent. Young, about 25, shoulder-length brown hair. She was serving in the VIP area last night." "Yes, sir. Anything else?" "Monitor Helen and Richard's movements. I want to know about all meetings, calls, encounters. And Teresa, don't tell anyone about this, not even my wife." After Teresa left, Gabriel turned on his laptop and began his own investigation. He accessed the restaurant's security cameras through the Montgomery Group's internal system. He reviewed the footage of the moment the waitress approached his table several times. There was something about her face, her expression, that intrigued him deeply. His cell phone wouldn't stop ringing. Helen, Richard, other executives from the group, journalists. He ignored all the calls, except for a text message from an unknown number. "There are more secrets than you imagine. Meet me tomorrow at 10 a.m. in Griffith Park. Come alone." The message was from the waitress, he was sure. But how had she gotten his number? Why had she decided to help him? And most importantly, how did she know about Helen's intentions? He spent the night awake, mentally reviewing the past few months. He remembered a heated discussion between Helen and Richard about the expansion into Asia. Helen had advocated for a more aggressive strategy, while Richard seemed resistant. At the time, he had interpreted it as a normal business disagreement. Now every memory gained new meanings. In the morning, he received an email from his lawyer with disturbing information. In the last 6 months, Helen had made several consultations about inheritance rights and asset transfers. Richard, in turn, was secretly negotiating with a Chinese group interested in acquiring part of the hotel chain. The sun had barely risen when Gabriel realized his breakfast was untouched. He looked out the hotel window, watching the city wake up. In a few hours, he would meet the mysterious waitress in Griffith Park. His instinct told him that this encounter would reveal truths that would change his life forever. Teresa sent a message. "Sir, I found something about the waitress. Her name is Laura Fields. She started working at the restaurant just 2 weeks ago. But there's more. I found an old photo that you need to see." Gabriel felt his heart race. Even before opening the photo, something inside him already knew. The truth was about to reveal itself, and it would be more surprising than any script he could imagine. Griffith Park exuded a tranquility that contrasted with Gabriel's inner turmoil. He arrived 10 minutes before the scheduled time, choosing a discreet bench with a view of the iconic Griffith Observatory. The photo Teresa had sent still reverberated in his mind, a yellowed image from 1998, showing a young woman who looked very much like Laura, standing next to her mother, Marina Fields. Marina. That name brought back long-buried memories. 1997, Santa Barbara, an intense summer before meeting Helen. Marina was a photographer with a sweet smile and dreams too big for a small town. The romance lasted only that season, but Gabriel had never completely forgotten those days of youth and freedom. Mr. Montgomery. The voice pulled him from his reminiscences. Laura was standing in front of him, wearing jeans and a simple blouse, very different from the restaurant uniform. Under the natural morning light, the resemblance to Marina was even more evident. "Please sit down," Gabriel indicated the space beside him. "I think we have a lot to talk about." Laura sat down, maintaining a tense posture. Her eyes, the same shade of green as his, studied every detail of his face. "I imagine you've already discovered who I am," she began, her voice firm despite visible nervousness. "You're Marina Field's daughter," Gabriel responded, feeling the weight of each word. "And apparently you're also my daughter." Laura nodded, taking an envelope from her bag. "Mum left these letters before she passed. She tried to contact you several times when she found out she was pregnant. All the letters were returned, all phone calls blocked." Gabriel took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside, he found several letters dated 1997 and 1998, all with the same recipient, himself, at the address of his first hotel. "I never received any of these letters," he murmured, leafing through the aged papers. "I never knew that Marina was pregnant." "Yeah, she figured something like that had happened. Someone was intercepting her attempts to contact you. It was only later that we discovered who." Gabriel looked up from the letters. "Helen." "Exactly. She was working as your secretary at the time, remember? Before you two started dating. Mum found out years later when it was too late. Helen made sure no information about me ever reached you." The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together. Helen had started as his secretary in 1997, taking the position right after Teresa left for maternity leave. The romance began months later, a relationship that Gabriel had always believed was the work of destiny. "Why are you telling me this now? Why did you warn me about the attempt on my life?" Laura took a deep breath. "Because my mother made me promise on her deathbed that I would seek you out one day, not for revenge or money, but because she believed you had the right to know. When I discovered Helen and Richard's plan, I realized it was my chance to fulfill that promise and, at the same time, prevent a tragedy." "How did you discover their plan?" "I work as a private investigator. I got the job at the restaurant after months of monitoring Helen and Richard. They planned everything meticulously. Your elimination, the transfer of shares, even the story they would tell the press. Helen would be the inconsolable widow, Richard, the loyal friend, taking control of the group to honor your legacy." Gabriel closed his eyes, feeling the weight of each revelation. 25 years of lies, a hidden daughter, a conspiring wife. His world was crumbling, but paradoxically, for the first time in a long time, he felt he was discovering the truth. "There's one more thing you need to know," Laura continued, her voice trembling slightly. "Helen didn't act out of ambition alone. She guards an even bigger secret, something I discovered during my investigation, something related to her family and an agreement made decades ago." At that moment, an elderly couple passed by them, commenting on the beauty of the park. Gabriel waited for them to move away before asking, "What kind of agreement?" "One that involves the true origin of her family's fortune. The first hotel she helped you buy, remember? It wasn't just a good deal. It was part of a much larger plan orchestrated long before you met her." Gabriel felt a chill. That hotel had been the starting point of his empire. The opportunity had come through Helen, who knew the owner. At the time, it seemed like a stroke of luck. Now he began to question every moment of his rise. Gabriel's private office, located in a commercial building in downtown Los Angeles, became the makeshift headquarters for his investigation. Laura had brought folders with documents, photos, and records she had collected over the months. Teresa, after learning the whole truth, joined them, bringing years of knowledge about the behind-the-scenes of the Montgomery Group. The first hotel, Laura began, spreading documents on the mahogany desk, originally belonged to the Anderson family. The patriarch, Augustus Anderson, was Helen's father. Teresa's eyes widened, But Helen always said her father was a merchant who had lost everything in a crisis. Another lie, Laura continued. Augustus Anderson was a powerful man, owner of a smaller but profitable hotel chain. In 1995, he started having problems with unsuccessful investments. That's when he met Richard Miller. Gabriel picked up an old photo, where a middle-aged man smiled next to a younger Richard Miller. So they knew each other before. Richard was a financial consultant at the time, Laura explained. He developed a complex plan. Instead of declaring bankruptcy, the Andersons could use a legitimate buyer to take over the business. Someone who could serve as a facade for a discreet restructuring of assets. Me, Gabriel murmured, feeling his stomach churn. They chose me to be that buyer. Exactly. Helen was assigned to get close to you. Her story of the dedicated secretary, the romance. Everything was meticulously planned. She was supposed to marry you and ensure that the Andersons' patrimony was preserved through what appeared to be a new business empire. Teresa, who was furiously typing on her laptop, interrupted. I found something. In 1996, there was a series of bank transfers from the Anderson family to offshore accounts. A few weeks later, the first hotel was put up for sale at a surprisingly low price. The money was hidden, Laura completed, and the hotel, apparently bankrupt, was sold to Gabriel for a fraction of its real value. With Helen as his wife, the Andersons maintained indirect control over everything. Gabriel stood up, walking to the window. The city stretched out before him, including several of his hotels. Or were they the Andersons' hotels? How many of his achievements were really his? But something changed, he said, turning to Laura. Why do they want to eliminate me now? Laura picked up another document. Because the patriarch, Augustus Anderson, is very ill. He demanded that Helen and Richard clean up the situation before he passed. The plan was to turn you into a martyr, the great businessman who built an empire and departed at his peak. Helen would naturally inherit everything, and Richard, as a loyal partner, would help manage the group. And the will I found? Teresa asked. The one Helen tried to get Gabriel to sign last month. Part of the plan, Laura confirmed. She needed to ensure everything would be in her name. The accident would be soon after. Gabriel returned to the desk, examining more documents. He found photos of Helen and Richard in secret meetings, records of suspicious transfers, coded emails. The web of lies was more extensive than he had imagined. There's something I still don't understand, he said, looking at Laura. How did you manage to uncover all of this? Laura hesitated, nervously fidgeting with her bag. Because my mother worked for the Andersons. She was the photographer for the first hotel, remember? That's how you two met, and that's how she discovered part of the scheme. Marina knew? Gabriel asked, astonished. She discovered some things when Helen started intercepting her letters. She tried to investigate further, but Laura swallowed hard. Helen threatened her, said if she tried to tell you anything, she would suffer the consequences. That's why Mum decided to stay away, to raise me alone, to protect us. Teresa, who was continuing her digital research, let out an exclamation. I found something else. Helen made a significant transfer last night to a private security company. Gabriel and Laura exchanged worried looks. Time was running against them. Helen, realizing her initial plan had failed, certainly had a plan B. And knowing her as he now did, it would be something even more elaborate and dangerous. The conference room of the Beverly Wilshire Hotel buzzed with the presence of the press. Helen Montgomery, elegant in a black Chanel suit, sat at the main table next to Richard Miller. Her words flowed with perfect eloquence as she made the announcement that would shake the market. It is with deep concern that I announce Gabriel Montgomery's temporary removal from the presidency of the group. In recent months, we have identified serious irregularities in some of our international operations. As vice president and shareholder, I cannot allow our company's reputation to be compromised. Camera flashes exploded as she continued her meticulously rehearsed performance. In the makeshift office, Gabriel watched the live broadcast, feeling his blood boil. She's trying to discredit me, he said, turning off the TV. She wants to force me to appear publicly to defend myself. And if you appear, you'll be vulnerable, Laura completed, furiously typing on her laptop. I just gained access to her emails. Helen hired not just one but 3 private security companies. They're looking for you all over the city. Teresa entered the room carrying a thick folder. I managed to recover the original documents from the first hotel. Look at this. She spread the papers on the table. There are 2 versions of the purchase and sale contract, the one that was officially registered and a second one kept in Helen's safe. Gabriel examined the documents, his eyes scanning each clause. The secret version contained a parallel agreement that guaranteed the Anderson family indirect control over all future acquisitions of the group. This proves that everything was a fraud from the beginning, Laura observed. But we need more. Something that exposes not just the original scheme, but also the attempted murder. I have an idea, Teresa said, picking up her cell phone. Jack, the security guard who was in the car, was discharged from the hospital today. He told me something interesting about the night of the accident. While Teresa made the call, Gabriel observed Laura. It was impressive how she had inherited not only his physical traits, but also his determination. In just a few days, the connection between father and daughter had strengthened in a way he never imagined possible. Jack is on his way, Teresa announced, hanging up the phone. He says he recognized the SUV driver. It was a former employee of the Anderson family. We need to act fast, Laura warned, showing her laptop. Helen just called an extraordinary shareholders meeting for tomorrow. She's going to try to formalize your removal. Gabriel stood up, a new energy taking over his body. Then let's turn the game around. Teresa, contact all board members. I want an emergency meeting tonight. Laura, prepare a dossier with all the evidence we have and He paused, a determined smile appearing on his face. I'm going to pay a visit to my father-in-law. To Mr. Anderson? Teresa asked, surprised. But he's very ill. Exactly. And I have a hunch that he won't like knowing that his daughter is about to destroy everything he built. Helen may have planned my elimination, but she forgot that her father always valued discretion. A public scandal is the last thing he would want. Laura approached, concerned. It's risky. The Anderson mansion must be under surveillance. That's why I need you to come with me, Gabriel responded, putting his hand on his daughter's shoulder. You know their security procedures. And besides... He hesitated for a moment. It's time for Augustus Anderson to meet his granddaughter. The plan began to take shape. While Teresa organized the board meeting, Gabriel and Laura prepared for their visit to Augustus Anderson. The family patriarch lived in seclusion in a mansion in Billionaire, surrounded by security guards and nurses. There's a side entrance, Laura explained, showing a blueprint of the property. The nurses use it to smoke. The shift change happens. At 7 p.m., we'll have a 10-minute window. Gabriel looked at his watch. They had only a few hours to execute the plan. Helen was playing her final cards, but she had underestimated one thing, the power of family secrets. And in that game, Gabriel had just gained an ally who knew that power very well. The Anderson mansion in Billionaire emerged from the mist like a fortress from another era. Built in the 1940s, it maintained the imposing character of residences from the old coffee nobility. Gabriel and Laura observed the movement of security guards from inside the car, discreetly parked a block away. The nurses always leave in a group for their break, Laura explained, checking her watch. When they pass through the side gate, we'll have our chance, sir. Gabriel adjusted the suit he was wearing. Even in this tense situation, he made a point of maintaining his impeccable appearance, a habit that had accompanied him since his early days as a businessman. How did you discover so many details about the house's routine? Laura smiled, a gesture that strongly reminded him of Marina. I spent 3 weeks posing as a pharmacy delivery person. It's amazing how people let their guard down for someone who seems to just be doing their job. At exactly 7 p.m. as predicted, a group of 4 nurses left through the side door. Laura made a signal, and both left the car, moving quickly through the shadow of the century-old trees that surrounded the property. The side door was left ajar, another detail Laura had noticed in her observations. They slipped into the mansion, finding themselves in a service corridor decorated with old photographs. Gabriel paused for a moment, observing one in particular, Helen as a child, sitting on her father's lap, both smiling at the camera. This way, Laura whispered, guiding him through a maze of corridors. His room is on the second floor, East Wing. There's always a nurse on duty, but at this time she usually takes a coffee break. Climbing the stairs in silence, Gabriel felt the weight of family history that permeated every inch of that house. How many secrets had those walls guarded? How many conspiracies had been hatched in those corridors? As they reached the second-floor hallway, they heard voices. Laura pulled Gabriel behind an ancient tapestry, just in time to see Helen leave her father's room. She seemed agitated, her usual composure replaced by an expression of concern. "I can't wait any longer, Dad," her voice echoed down the corridor. "The board meets tomorrow. I need your authorization now." A weak sound came from inside the room. Augustus Anderson's voice, once so powerful, now reduced to a whisper. Helen shook her head in frustration and walked quickly down the hallway, her heels echoing on the wooden floor. As soon as she disappeared around the corner, Laura made a signal. It was their chance. They approached the room, and Gabriel gently turned the doorknob. Augustus Anderson was seated in an antique armchair, facing the window that offered a privileged view of the mansion's gardens. Despite the illness consuming him, his posture still emanated authority. "I knew you would come," he said without turning, his voice weak but firm. "Ever since I heard about the accident with your car." Gabriel took a few steps forward, while Laura remained near the door. "Then you know why I'm here." "Helen has always been too ambitious," Augustus sighed, finally turning the armchair to face them. His eyes, still alive and penetrating, fixed first on Gabriel, then on Laura. "And who is this young woman who has the same determined look as Marina Fields?" The comment caught both by surprise. Gabriel felt his heart race. "You knew Marina?" A tired smile appeared on the patriarch's face. "I knew everyone who worked in my hotels, Montgomery, including talented young photographers who documented our properties. And I also knew when these photographers desperately tried to contact certain rising businessmen." "So you knew," Laura took a step forward, her voice trembling slightly, "about the intercepted letters?" "Yes." "About you?" "Also. Helen thought she could hide everything from me, but I always had my own ways of staying informed." He paused, coughing lightly. "What she never understood is that our patrimony wasn't just about money or power. It was about legacy." Gabriel moved closer, sitting in a chair nearby. "Why did you allow her to carry out the plan? Why didn't you tell me the truth about the hotel?" "Because you proved to be exactly what our empire needed, Montgomery. You transformed a failing business into a global powerhouse. Helen may have planned to use you, but in the end, it was your vision that saved the Anderson legacy." He looked at Laura again. "And now I see that fate has an interesting sense of humor. My true granddaughter appears just when we need someone, with new blood to preserve that legacy." Augustus Anderson reached for a worn leather folder on his side table. His trembling hands, marked by time, still maintained the firmness necessary to handle important documents. The scent of old paper filled the air as he opened it. "Helen thinks she has all the original documents of the Anderson Empire," he said, carefully removing some papers. "But a man doesn't build a decades-long legacy without learning to keep some aces up his sleeve." Laura and Gabriel moved closer, watching as the patriarch spread the documents across an antique rosewood table. There were contracts, deeds, and most surprisingly letters, dozens of them. "These are Marina's original letters," Augustus explained, separating a small pile. "Helen intercepted them, but my private secretary always made copies of all correspondence. That arrived, a habit she maintained for 40 years. Gabriel picked up one of the letters with trembling hands. Marina's delicate handwriting, the slightly yellowed paper, the faint perfume that still lingered after so many years. "Why did you keep all this?" "Because I always knew that one day the truth would need to come out," Augustus replied, his gaze alternating between father and daughter. "Helen is repeating the same mistakes that almost destroyed our family in the past. Unbridled ambition, manipulation, lies. I cannot allow this to continue." A sound of footsteps in the hallway made Laura move quickly to the door, checking through the crack. "It's all clear," she whispered, "but we shouldn't stay much longer." Augustus nodded, picking up another document. This is even more important. The true Anderson family will, registered 3 months ago. In it, I officially recognize Laura as my legitimate granddaughter, and therefore heir to a significant part of the family patrimony. Gabriel and Laura exchanged surprised looks. But how? Laura asked. You never met me in person until today. I knew you through reports from investigators I hired to follow your life and your mother's, Augustus revealed. I watched you grow, graduate with honors, become a brilliant investigator. Marina did an excellent job raising you. The patriarch coughed, and for a moment his strength seemed to falter. Recovering, he continued, Helen is right now trying to consolidate her final coup. Tomorrow's board meeting is just a formality. She believes she has all the votes necessary to permanently remove Gabriel. And Richard, Gabriel asked, what exactly is his role in all this? A bitter smile appeared on Augustus's face. Richard Miller is an opportunist who has always known too much. Helen keeps him close because he knows all the schemes from the beginning. But she made a crucial mistake. She trusted too much in someone who is only loyal to money. Laura opened her bag, removing a flash drive. This confirms my suspicions. I found records of recent transfers from Richard to overseas accounts. He's preparing for a possible betrayal. The meeting is scheduled for 10 a.m., Gabriel commented, checking his watch. If we're going to act, it needs to be before that. Augustus. Anderson adjusted himself in his armchair, new energy seeming to take over his weakened body. Tonight, Helen will come to visit me again. She needs my signature on some documents to legitimize the board's decisions. It will be our opportunity. For what? Laura asked. For a long overdue family meeting, the patriarch responded. It's time for Helen to discover that she's not the only one who knows how to keep secrets. Teresa still works for you, Montgomery. Gabriel nodded. She's been my most loyal assistant for decades. Excellent. Ask her to prepare the conference room at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel for tonight, 9 p.m. That same room where Helen gave her interview this morning. Augustus smiled, a glint of astuteness in his eyes. My daughter has always had a weakness for grand public performances. Let's give her a night she'll never forget. As they finalized the details, Laura received a message on her cell phone. Her eyes widened as she read the content. Richard just made an interesting move. He scheduled a secret meeting with the group's main shareholders for tonight, an hour before our meeting. He's playing both sides, Gabriel concluded, preparing his own move. Let him think he's in control, Augustus said, his voice carrying the weight of experience. The best plans are those where our adversaries believe they're in command until the very last moment. The Beverly Wilshire Hotel pulsed with a peculiar energy that night. Teresa had prepared the main ballroom, according to Augustus Anderson's instructions, transforming the space into a setting worthy of what was to come. The old photographs of the Anderson family, carefully selected from the patriarch's archives, adorned the walls in an improvised exhibition that silently told the story of decades of power and secrets. Gabriel observed the movement in the lobby through security cameras installed in an adjacent room. Laura, by his side, monitored Richard and Helen's communications through sophisticated equipment. Richard just arrived, Laura announced, adjusting her headphones. He's meeting with the shareholders in the mezzanine. He seems nervous, promising. Bombshell revelations about the group's management. Teresa entered the room carrying a folder. The documents Mr. Anderson provided are already organized in sequence. I also included records of Richard's suspicious transfers and evidence of the attempted murder. Gabriel nodded, his mind reviewing every detail of the plan. The last few hours had been intense. After leaving the Anderson mansion, he and Laura had worked tirelessly to organize all the evidence. The puzzle was finally complete, revealing an even more complex plot than they had imagined. Helen just left the mansion, Laura informed, checking her cell phone. Mr. Anderson's private nurse confirmed she left extremely irritated. Apparently he refused to sign the documents she needed. She'll try another approach, Gabriel reflected, adjusting his tie. Helen always has a plan B. As if confirming his words, Teresa received a message. Her lawyers have just filed a request for Mr. Anderson's interdiction, alleging mental incapacity. They want to use this at tomorrow's assembly. Laura let out an ironic laugh. She doesn't waste time, but this only proves she's desperate. A movement on the cameras caught everyone's attention. Richard was descending the mezzanine stairs, accompanied by a group of shareholders. Their expressions were grave, some making notes on their cell phones. "He's playing all his cards," Laura commented, turning up the audio volume. "He just showed documents that supposedly prove mismanagement in the group. He's trying to convince the shareholders that the only way out is a complete removal of the Montgomery family." "What he doesn't know," Teresa smiled, "is that we have the original documents proving that he himself orchestrated these supposed misappropriations." Gabriel checked his watch. 8:45 p.m. In 15 minutes, the main ballroom would begin receiving guests for what Helen believed to be an emergency meeting with her father. Augustus Anderson would be brought from his mansion by a trusted driver, arriving purposely a few minutes late. "Laura," Gabriel called, observing his daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. "Are you sure you want to do this? Once we enter that ballroom, there's no turning back. Helen will discover who you are." Laura stood up, her green eyes so similar to her father's, shining with determination. "Mom spent years trying to protect me from the Andersons, but now it's time to face the truth, all the truths." Teresa, who had known Gabriel for so long, noticed something different in his gaze. It wasn't just the determination of a businessman defending his empire, but the strength of a father protecting his family. "The first guests are arriving," she announced, observing the cameras. "Helen just entered the hotel. She's accompanied by two men I've never seen before." "Private security," Laura explained, consulting her tablet. "Hired this afternoon. She's expecting trouble." Gabriel straightened his suit, preparing for what was to come. Augustus Anderson's last words echoed in his mind. Helen always wanted to be the center of attention. Today she'll have her biggest audience. A soft sound indicated the arrival of a new message on Laura's cell phone. "It's from Grandpa," she said, the word still sounding strange on her lips. "He's on his way, and he's brought one last surprise." "What surprise?" Teresa asked. Laura showed the message to Gabriel, whose eyes widened slightly. "Impressive," he murmured. Even after all these years, old Augustus still knows how to change the game. The main ballroom of the Beverly Wilshire Hotel was elegantly prepared for what promised to be a historic night. Crystal chandeliers cast a soft light over the guests arriving in a steady stream. Helen Montgomery circulated through the room with her usual elegance, though a keen observer might notice a certain tension in her smile. Richard Miller strategically kept close to the group of shareholders he had met with earlier, occasionally casting nervous glances towards the ballroom entrance. His expression alternated between rehearsed confidence and poorly disguised apprehension. At 9:15 p.m., Gabriel Montgomery made his entrance. A murmur swept through the room. It was his first public appearance since the alleged accident. Wearing an impeccably tailored suit, he exuded a calmness that visibly disconcerted Helen. "What a pleasant surprise, darling," she said, approaching with a forced smile. "I didn't expect to see you here tonight." "I imagine not," Gabriel replied, softly. "Just as you didn't expect to see me after that night at the restaurant." Before Helen could respond, a commotion at the ballroom entrance announced the arrival of Augustus Anderson. The patriarch was in a wheelchair, but his presence still commanded instant respect. Beside him, to everyone's astonishment, was an elegant grey-haired lady, Beatrice Anderson, his wife, whom everyone believed had been in a Swiss retirement clinic for over a decade. "Mom?" Helen whispered, her face losing all color. Beatrice Anderson advanced through the room, her eyes fixed on her daughter. "Hello, Helen. You seem surprised to see me. Your father thought it was time for me to come home." Laura, who had entered discreetly moments before, positioned herself close to Gabriel. Teresa, following the established plan, began distributing folders with documents to the main shareholders present. "What does this mean?" Helen demanded, her voice trembling slightly. "Dad, what papers are these?" "The truth, my daughter," Augustus responded, his voice weak but clear. "All the truth you tried to hide for so many years." Richard Miller tried to approach the exit, but two hotel security guards discreetly blocked his path. Gabriel stepped forward, taking center stage in the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice filling the room, "a few weeks ago, someone tried to eliminate me. The plan was meticulous, an apparently casual car accident that would pave the way for a complete restructuring of the Montgomery Group, or should I say, the Anderson Group." The shareholders began leafing through the documents in their hands, expressions of shock and indignation appearing on their faces. "How dare you?" Helen tried to intervene, but her mother interrupted her. "How dare you, Helen?" Beatrice questioned. "Wasn't it enough to manipulate your father all these years? Did you need to try to eliminate an innocent man?" "Innocent?" Helen laughed bitterly. "He stole what was ours. The entire empire that Dad built, that I preserved and expanded," Gabriel completed. "While you and Richard planned how to usurp everything through fraudulent documents." Laura stepped forward, stopping beside Augustus. The patriarch took her hand, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by anyone. "Helen," Augustus said, "allow me to introduce your niece Laura, daughter of Gabriel Montgomery and Marina Fields, the granddaughter you tried to keep away from our family." Helen looked at Laura, then at Gabriel, understanding finally dawning on her face. "The waitress. It was you who warned him." "Because it was the right thing to do," Laura responded, "just as it was right for Marina to protect me from you all these years." Richard, seeing the situation completely slip out of his control, tried one last gambit. "The documents I showed the shareholders prove irregularities in Montgomery's management." "We have evidence." "False," Teresa intervened, distributing more papers. "Just as the reports you produced to hide your own frauds were false, Mr. Miller." Beatrice Anderson approached her daughter, who seemed about to collapse. "Helen, you had everything. Our trust, our family, a position of respect. Why?" "Because it was never enough," Helen exploded. "Being just the daughter of the great Augustus Anderson, then the wife of the brilliant Gabriel Montgomery, I deserved more. I deserved to be the true owner of all this. And for that," Gabriel concluded, "you were willing to eliminate anyone who stood in your way, including your own husband." The sun was rising over Los Angeles, its first golden rays reflecting off the windows of the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. In the penthouse suite, Gabriel Montgomery watched the city awaken, mentally reviewing the events of the previous night. The last 24 hours had completely transformed his life, destroying old certainties, but also paving the way for new beginnings. In the main ballroom, the confrontation had reached its dramatic climax. After Helen's emotional outburst, Beatrice Anderson had taken control of the situation with an authority that only a matriarch could wield. "Enough," she had declared, her voice cutting through the tense air of the room. "Our family has lived with too many lies. Helen, you not only betrayed your husband and your family, but you also forgot the true meaning of the Anderson legacy." Richard Miller, realizing that his entire plan was crumbling, attempted one last desperate move. "The documents I have prove irregularities. If I fall, everyone falls with me." That's when Augustus Anderson made his final move. With surprising calmness, he had revealed his last card. "Mr. Miller, do you really believe that I didn't keep records of all your manipulations? Every false document, every suspicious transaction, every conspiracy with my daughter. It's all here with copies already in the hands of the proper authorities." Now, on the morning after, Gabriel watched Laura sleep on the living room sofa of the penthouse suite. She had insisted on staying close, fearing some desperate retaliation from Helen. Her serene face reminded him so much of Marina that it sometimes hurt to look. Teresa entered the room silently, carrying a breakfast tray. "The newspapers are already reporting everything," she informed in a low voice. "The board of directors has called an extraordinary meeting for this afternoon." "And Helen?" Gabriel asked, picking up a cup of coffee. "She's at her parents' mansion. Beatrice insisted that she stay there under supervision. Richard, well, he tried to leave the country early this morning, but the authorities intercepted him at the airport." Laura stirred on the sofa, slowly opening her eyes. "What time is it?" "Almost 8, Gabriel replied, sitting close to his daughter. "Did you sleep well?" "Like a rock," she smiled, accepting the coffee cup Teresa offered her. "It still feels like a dream, you know? Last night, when Grandpa officially introduced me to everyone, Augustus always knew what he was doing," Teresa commented. "Keeping Beatrice informed of everything all these years, even when Helen thought her mother was isolated in Switzerland, it was a masterful plan." Gabriel's phone rang. It was Augustus Anderson. After a brief conversation, he turned to Laura. "And Teresa, he wants to see us, all of us." An hour later, they were in the library of the Anderson mansion. The room, with its floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelves, breathed history and tradition. Augustus was seated in his favorite armchair, Beatrice by his side. Helen, seated further away, kept her eyes lowered. "The board will vote this afternoon," Augustus began, his voice stronger than the night before. "But before that, we need to resolve family matters." Beatrice picked up an old folder, removing a yellow document from it. "This is the true Anderson family will. In it, we officially recognize Laura as our granddaughter, and therefore a legitimate heir to part of the patrimony." "But that's not all," Augustus continued. "Gabriel, you've proven to be more than a competent businessman. You've proven to be a man of honor even when betrayed. The Montgomery Anderson Group needs strong leadership, but also just leadership." Helen finally raised her eyes, silent tears running down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Ambition. It completely blinded me." "Daughter," Beatrice said softly, "you'll need help to recover. I've already arranged everything. There's an excellent clinic in Switzerland, the same one where everyone thought I was. But this time it will be true." Gabriel observed the scene with a mix of emotions. His life had been built on a lie, but from that lie, true and valuable things had been born. His talent for business, his leadership capacity, and now, most importantly, the discovery of Laura. "What happens now?" Laura asked, her voice breaking the silence that had settled. Augustus smiled, a tired but satisfied smile. "Now, my dear, we start anew, without lies, without manipulations, just the truth and the true meaning of family." On that morning, as the sun climbed in the Los Angeles sky, new paths were opening. The Montgomery Anderson empire would survive, transformed but strengthened by the truth. Helen would depart for Switzerland, seeking redemption and healing. Richard would face the consequences of his actions before justice. And Gabriel, looking at Laura, his long-lost daughter now finally found, understood that sometimes we need to lose everything we thought we had to find what truly matters. "Shall we have breakfast?" Beatrice suggested, breaking the solemn moment. "Teresa, dear, you still know where the kitchen is, don't you? We need to celebrate this new beginning." As they headed to the kitchen, Gabriel felt Laura's hand hold his. In her eyes, so similar. To his own, there was not only the reflection of the past, but mainly the promise of the future. A future built not on lies and manipulations, but on truth, forgiveness, and family love. And so, the empire that began with a lie found its redemption. In truth, proving that the strongest bonds are not built by power or ambition, but by love and honesty.